welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you for having me, JD. I'm glad to be here, man.
Yep, the unlicensed we weren't sure, unlicensed therapists or MJs. Now, just for everybody watching, what do you do for a living?
I am a substance abuse, mental health, and trauma therapist at a treatment center in Tennessee.
Cool. Yeah, you fit right into either show then, and you're actually the first. This is why I wanted to do the unlicensed therapist, is because you are the first trauma therapist that I've had on this show. So I thought it was important, when you told me that, I'm like, oh, well, I know exactly, which kind of route to go down, which would be this. Now let's start here. What's your sober date?
June 7th, 2019.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you got a little over 6 years then.
Yeah, I've got a little over 6 years now.
Okay. So June 7th, 2019. One of my favorite questions to ask after I asked that one is, what was happening June 2019?
Well, June 6th is really the story. June 5th is the story, and the night of
Okay.
June 4th. So what happened on that one night, I don't have a problem sharing it. So I would still go over to my mom's to cook with her and everything, even an active addiction, like once a week. It was like that way of telling myself I'm not as sick as I am because I'm doing this. And I went over to her house, and my mom's a pretty religious person, and she was praying with the door open. And I heard her praying to God to kill her because she couldn't go on watching me living anymore. And she was convinced that God wasn't going to let me die after everything I'd survived so far. I got really in my feels about that. We still cooked, had dinner, and there were a couple other secrets that became exposed, and I got really mad. And I didn't threaten my mom, but I threatened myself. I don't know if you can see it or not. I got this gnarly scar on my
Yeah.
arm. Working on a race car, I put a hood pin through it, and it was an open wound that you could see the sunlight through. And didn't threaten her, but I threatened to cut my own arm. And she did exactly what she needed to do. She called the cops, and I was taken in for a 72-hour hold. But I had been to many of these places before, so I was able to talk my way out of it in less than 24 hours.
A lot of
And
us are.
before I left, the nurse only asked me one thing: don't drink today. And it wasn't even 2 hours later, I was on my porch having a Red Bull and Everclear. And I guess you would say I'm not
Cool.
going to bottom, but I reached that point where what am I doing? I can't even do this thing I was asked to do not even a couple hours ago. And
Yeah.
there was a man who did an intervention on me right after my dad's funeral, like the next day within hours. And I called him. And I'd been to treatment many times. We can get into that if you want, how many
Yeah,
times I've
we'll,
been.
we'll, we'll backtrack. Yeah, I always like to backtrack.
No problem. And I told him I needed help. Yeah, I don't know what to do. I'm looking at going to this place in Massachusetts called Swift River again. I'd been there once or twice before. And he said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Man, I don't know. I just don't know." And he was like, "Well, pack your bags, call this number down in Tennessee, and I'm going to give you the simple instructions. I want you to sit down, shut up, listen, and don't effing leave this time." Um, and the rest is history, man. I'd love to tell you it was nice and simple, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
I had to get more just to be able to get on the plane and everything. And I may have done this where I've gone to treatment before, got on a plane and everything. So this treatment center was a little bit wise to that, and they didn't just have somebody waiting; they had somebody waiting at the exit ramp to follow me towards the vehicle. Because that's what we do. We really, we can change our minds, and it's
Yeah.
one of those things that that's what was happening June 6th. I was getting on a plane and people were coming to get me. Uh, I'm so grateful I made it there, but the 2 days that led up to that are what got me to go back.
So, were you close with your dad?
My dad died in 2017. I was taking care of him as he was dying of end-stage COPD emphysema. They
Okay.
said he was going to live 2 years, and he lived 10. The issue with that is, though my dad was an alcoholic too, he never admitted it. He didn't like to drink alone, and he liked his Maker's Mark and his bourbon. However, when you're drinking Everclear, it's got a little bit different proof, and he
Yeah.
doesn't drink
Oh,
alone,
I
so he would
remember.
make me a drink every time he
Yeah.
finished it. So that didn't end
Oh.
too well.
Yeah. I mean, I drank. The first time I drank Everclear, I was in ninth grade or eighth grade. Was
Yeah.
the first time I drank Everclear, and you don't forget that burn. that burn never leaves that esophagus once you taste it for the first time.
Fun scientific fact on Everclear I found out. Actually, I'm also blind in one eye. I was completely blind for a period of time. I'm sure you'll want to get into that too. Everclear attacks the ocular nerve. And I'm
Yeah,
sure there were many doctors that told me that, but I just wasn't in a place where I was going to listen. That's not going to happen to me.
yeah. So you grew up in Tennessee then? We'll
No,
backtrack.
I grew up in Indiana, a town called Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been there once. I've been there once for a work conference, work with my dad and my brother. We had a franchise of Roto-Rooter Plumbing, and we had to do the Roto-Rooter stuff for the franchise in Fort Wayne.
Okay.
So I've been there once back in 2016,
Okay.
September up to August 2016. So about 9 years ago was the last time I was there. So you grew up there. How long did you grow up there for?
Um, Most of my life, I traveled when I got to race, and of course, treatment centers. That's
Yeah.
one of those things hit all the states pretty much either in racing or treatment centers. A number of states, a couple of times. And it's one of those things. Probably 30 some years is what I was there for. I went to elementary and high school there and everything. And it was great. We lived more in town at the beginning for the first 6 years of my life, and then we kind of moved out up north where there's a bunch of hospitals now. But when we went up there was just a four-way stop. Now it's like 6 lanes with like 12 stoplights. It's gotten ridiculous. But it's
Okay.
one of those things. It was great for me growing up. Uh, there were a number of things that what I have come to find in being a therapist today is we all think we've had a normal childhood until we're exposed to another experience. And the more I look at it, what I finally landed on, and this is where 12 steps have really helped me, is my dad and my mom did the best job they could with what they knew and how they were raised. So
How old are you, Matt?
I'm 45. I just turned 45 in
Okay.
July.
Okay, yeah. So, I'm 39. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, our parents flying by the seat of their pants. Even I have an 11-year-old stepson. And I still feel like I'm trying to figure this shit out. And Google exists, and ChatGPT exists, and I'm still trying to figure. And I can't imagine 80s, 90s trying to figure this out, like my parents did. I'm the oldest of three. Do you have any brothers or sisters, or
Yeah,
just you?
I have. I call them my brother and my sister by legal definition. They're a half brother, half sister, but they are my brother and my sister. Older, my brother is the oldest. My sister's the middle child, and I'm the baby.
Okay.
There's
Um,
this gap. There's like a 10-year gap between me and my sister. Actually, maybe more.
Yeah, I mean I'm 9 years older than my sister and 3 years older than my brother. And I definitely pulled apart growing up, where I was very independent even as a baby, but especially since my brother wanted attention as the middle child and my sister got the attention as the baby and the only girl, I really pulled away. And, my sister and I, it's not like we weren't close. It's just, when I was 13, she was 4, close as we can be. Now we're very close in our 30s, and late 20s. Now we're very close friends. But, it's different growing up and you're that kind of age difference, I'm sure, as you know, with having siblings that much older.
Yeah.
Now, all from the same parents?
Um. So my mom had my sister before she had met my dad. My dad had my brother before she met my mom, and I guess not completely. No, each one's from a different one.
Okay. Now, did your parents stay together your whole life? Because it's
No, my
no,
parents
okay.
got divorced when I was 13, but the one thing I will say is even when I really got deep in active addiction, they could set their differences aside to sit down to talk to me, and they were both very supportive. It was an interesting kind of family structure. We would still get together for holidays, and even when my dad was sick, once a week, my mom would come over and help clean the house and cook dinner. I mean, they were supportive of each other, especially when it came to me, but I would say they still cared for each other. They didn't violently or viciously attack each other.
Okay. Did you grow up with one more than the other, or did you kind of split time?
So at the beginning, this is going to sound really crazy to you. When my parents first got divorced, they lived in the same subdivision.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I lived with my mom, and like Tuesdays and Thursdays, my dad would pick me up from soccer practice, and I spend the weekend with him. One of the bonds my dad and me really quickly developed was whether there was anything good playing or not. We always went to a movie on the weekend, and it's one of my really happy memories of my father.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about, growing up in that time and even catching a movie, especially with your dad is a totally different thing. Now with streaming everywhere, I remember going to like, Blockbuster, back in the day on a Friday, my dad's long week of work and checking out a movie and, going home. I still have a visceral, vivid memory of 1995. We did a lot of road trips growing up, my family and I. And this is before my sister was born. And I'm from South Jersey and right outside of Philadelphia. And we did a road trip up to the Baseball Hall of Fame in New York. And then we went up to Canada and went up to the Hockey Hall of Fame. So we're a big hockey family. And then we caught like a Phillies game in Montreal. And we were in a hotel in Toronto. And my mom was doing laundry at the hotel laundromat, and we watched a small movie that just came out on hotel video on demand, which was Tommy Boy. And 9 years old and watching Tommy Boy for the first time, and now I watch it all the time. But I still have like a memory of watching it with my dad and little brother in a hotel on this small ass TV and it being one of our favorite movies to watch together as like a family. My dad passed away 2 years ago, so I still have, all those reminders whenever I catch a movie like that.
I feel you 100%, JD. There's a number of movies. I mean, even recently on Father's Day, I sat down and picked out a movie that my dad liked to watch, kind of in honor of him. But the movie that I love was from Christmas time that I had it was took forever to find on DVD. Was Trapped in Paradise. For
Okay, I
whatever
don't know
reason,
that one.
both loved it. It's Nicolas Cage, John Lovitz, Dana Carvey. Uh, you can watch that movie and not laugh. You let me know.
Yeah.
It's it's just one of those that was just ridiculous, but it was fun, and I can still remember my dad laughing at that movie, and I'll pop that in from time to time, and I just
Mhm.
it brings back those happy memories because there's a lot of those that aren't so happy as well.
Yeah. So did you grow up that on Saturday Night Live?
I did not really watch Saturday Night Live, honestly.
Okay. I'm surprised because Dana Carvey and John Lovitz, and that was around that time when they were both, thriving on SNL. So I wasn't sure. So,
It's
all right, grew up in Indiana, parents not really together. What did you discover first, drugs or alcohol?
Looking back, the first thing I can remember was a buddy had cloves that we smoked out of the bottom of a soda can or whatever. And that really wasn't anything. But then I found
Okay.
alcohol. My first night drinking was pretty insane. It should have been the immediate sign that this was not good for me. We got, somebody got us a bottle of rum, gin, vodka, tequila, the basics and everything. And we'd agreed we were going to have like a shot every hour. I can remember sneaking back every 15 minutes to get more. And there was a situation, I think I threw a buddy. No, he threw me down the stairs. I threw him off the roof of the sunroom. And I also remember the night ended with like two girls holding me up over the toilet, forcing me to puke so I didn't die. Um, and like we do, like next week, sign me up again,
Yep.
and it kind of got off to the races there. Was kind of just a weekend thing, but then of course summer came and it became a little bit more common and was able to get it more. And
How
drugs
old were
came.
How old were you when that happened, Matt?
I was 18. I was
Okay.
18 at the time.
Yeah. All right. So you were a little bit of you kind of discovered it on an average age. I feel like I'm sure working in a treatment center, you've heard all the different ages of where
All,
people discovered alcohol, and I feel like 18 is about average. I mean, I started at 11,
I
and
was
that
gonna say the median age, I want to say as of last year, has dropped to 12 years old. And the
yeah,
scary thing
okay,
about that is that's the median. So that means there's some that are even
Lower, yeah.
younger. Um,
There's only been lower than 11. I've done my other show, 200 some episodes. I've interviewed people all over the world, and there's been a couple people younger than 11 because that sticks out to me because I was 11, so I always remember those. And the one guy was, I asked him, when did you discover drugs or alcohol? And I still remember it. This guy's Foster. He's a good friend of mine. He was my first guest on this show, Foster, and he's been on the other one like 5, 6 times now. And I said to him, "What did you discover first, drugs or alcohol?" And he said, "Well, I was about 5, 6 years old when they started giving me drugs." I said, "Who was giving you drugs?" And it was his stepdad and his aunt. They were feeding him drugs to molest him at a young age, and that's when he got hooked, to drugs and alcohol. And I discovered I was, and you'll probably appreciate this because your age, but I was watching The Outsiders all the time when I was 11 and my friend and we would sneak, Captain Morgan from my parents' basement and make Captain and Coke and watch The Outsiders. And then I had experienced some trauma at 12, and that's when I was like became a daily drinker, and that continued for a decade until I discovered opiates. And then I was like, well, this is what I really needed. This
Yeah.
is it right here. So okay, you're 18. That's we'll call it a late bloomer. And so because your dad was a drinker, right, growing up?
So the way I understand it from what I found is my dad drank in towards the end of high school and throughout all of college. But he's kind of like anybody that's ever read the big book, The Man of 30. So he got the job, the family, and everything, and it kind of got put on the back burner where he might drink at a holiday function or whatever, but that was really it. Where it really, really kicked back off is when he retired from work or was, kind of given a severance package, and he was told there was not much of a chance that he was going to live, so his drinking just went through the roof. One point in time, we had almost like a standing order at Sam's Club where I'd get a case of half gallons of Maker's Mark, and that could be gone sometimes in a week to 2 weeks.
Okay. Now, you said you went to college then?
I went to a business college and then I went to Indiana Tech. So I got degrees in economics and accounting and business administration management.
Okay, so that's what you were saying about being good at math.
Yes.
And that's where that came in for accounting.
Yeah, it for me, accounting is just I look at it and I immediately know both sides have to balance. So my brain just immediately starts almost in my head. Like the thing I got in trouble for in high school, geometry, everybody knows there needs to be proofs or they want proofs. I
Yeah.
was doing proofs in my head. And the teacher would say, "Well, that's not right." And one time she asked me to come up to the board and write it, and I just scribbled out the proof, and the look on her face was just aghast. There was no process of going underneath or this or that. It just came out.
Mm.
So it's one of those things that there are a number of things that have come easier to me in life, and because I have no problem also telling you I was taking freshman English my junior year because I could not grasp grammar. I just didn't understand grammar. It did not work for me. So, it's one of those things. What we generally find is, for like alcoholics and addicts, is we're really successful in certain areas of our lives or certain subjects, and then there's those other subjects we lack at. However, what I really discovered for me when I had that not good enough, I didn't try to learn. I just viewed myself as not good enough and excelled at the things I was good at because, I was a developing kid to a teenager. So I wanted to do what I was good at, and I didn't really see the need to know these other things.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when you got into college, did your drinking progress?
It only got worse.
Yeah.
It went through the roof. Opiates came in hardcore. I can remember the first time I was introduced to a needle, and because people had seen me snort it before, and this girl, thank God she's still alive and she's in recovery in Fort Wayne, and I'm so proud of her. She was looking at me and she said these words to me: "Be careful, it's a monster. This could be the death of you." And the good alcoholic addict, whatever phrase you want to use, sign me up, and yeah, that was the beginning of a lot of things. For probably the first year, I never shot myself up because I was scared of needles, and it was kind of one of those things. Hang on,
Yeah, you're good.
there we go.
Yep.
Okay. It was one of those things that it became necessity because the one thing I found is I progressed in my addiction was a lot of isolation. I could be
Yeah.
around people, but I became more concerned. So it was kind of out of necessity. I started learning how to do it myself, and that isolation only grew.
Yeah, it's crazy because like I agree. I didn't allow myself to inject because I knew exactly what would happen with my disease the
Mhm.
second I did. It's one of those come to Jesus moments. When I discovered opiates in October 2008, right as I started really climbing the charts, and I remember I had done, I don't know, like 120 milligrams worth of oxycodone up my nose and hung out with a pothead buddy of mine. And we used to watch a lot of concerts on DVD. And it was around Christmas time, something like that. He had just gotten a new one. It might have been like Billy Joel or something. And we're hanging out. And he had just had his wisdom teeth taken out. And this dude could smoke, and he probably still can, a ton of weed and just be completely good to go. And he took 5 milligrams of Percocet, not even Roxy, Percocet, which is filled with Tylenol, and he was out cold. And I was sitting there just like, damn, like I'm wide awake. I just did 120 milligrams of the pure stuff, the Roxy's, not even the Oxy, and I'm fine. And this dude is just done. This might be a problem. And this was like 3 or 4 months into my addiction, and that's when I had one of those like just chain smoking cigarettes. Is like I gotta come up with a plan here because I don't want to stop the train. There's no getting off this train right now because I love this feeling too much. So I'll make this rule: I won't do heroin and I won't shoot it. Those are my rules, and I'll stick with that. And as long as I don't do those two things, I can continue doing these little blue pills.
Mhm.
And then a decade later, 9.5 years later, I decided to go to rehab, and I haven't touched opiates since. But I stuck to those rules, and that's what kept. I didn't cross my own rules, and that's what actually kept me in addiction for so long. Was that I was like, well, I still got a job, I'm still paying for these. I've only gotten in trouble by the law twice, so am I really that bad? Like the rules that we set and the lies we tell ourselves to keep ourselves going in addiction kind of situation. So I totally get, but the isolation, really struck a nerve because that wanting to be alone and that feel the need that almost like it was a shame because I felt a lot of shame where like I felt like I didn't want anyone to know how much I was actually using.
So looking back in my life, there is a ton of shame. That's another thing that I can't either say it any other way. I love being able to talk to clients about and to gauge their willingness to engage in what shame work could look like. It's kind of one of my jams to get into it, and it's possibly what I found why shame and trauma are so personal to me is because I have a lot of them myself. And it's just that looking back, I can see so much shame. There was a situation in middle school where I never had good eyesight, but it was bad. I had these glasses that were thicker than Coke bottles, and I think it was the first day somebody poured chicken noodle soup over my head in middle school, and the second day was going to be like broccoli cheddar. However, I took my glasses off and split the kid's head open and broke his nose because that shame was so great inside of me, and I can see how that affected me going forward. Like being in the locker room, I didn't want to change in front of anybody, and it wasn't that I had anything to be ashamed of. I just felt that
Yeah,
experience from that. And there were a number of things I can look back on in life looking at I didn't try at because I'd already told myself I can't do this. And it's what I've come to understand. That's because the shame was so deep rooted, and it's the most common operating place for any alcoholic or addict. In fact, there's a number of people that believe today there can be no addiction without shame.
Yep. Yep. That's why I asked, and the middle school thing, that I couldn't, I hated getting changed in gym. That's where like my trauma really started, was in that locker room,
Mhm.
where, and that's when I started becoming a daily drinker, was at that age in sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. And, my parents weren't alcoholics. My parents knew how to throw a party, and they would always get a ton of liquor for the parties that they threw. And then the problem was not really a problem for me at that age. Um, they would take the leftover bottles and then put them into the basement and then not touch them, not look at them. They would just collect dust. And I knew where they were. And I would go down and I would grab a whole bottle. They would have no idea that it'd be missing because they weren't looking at it every day. How some people grow up, and I'm sure you heard that the whole thing of like, oh, well, I would take the bottle of vodka, I would drink some, pour some water inside so they wouldn't see the levels change because my parents
Mhm.
drank it all. I didn't have that problem.
Yeah.
I could take a whole bottle, take it up to my bedroom, hide it in my bedroom where my cigarettes were. And, I could hide in my one, my bedroom was the attic of the house converted into a bedroom. And the one room off of my bedroom was a walk-in closet that had a window. Nobody was underneath of that window. So I could smoke out that window. I could be in that walk-in closet and drink. Nobody ever came up to my bedroom. I can count on one hand in 8 years how many times my parents individually together came up to my bedroom. And I would hide a bottle of liquor in there and just at night take swigs, smoke a black and mild, smoke some weed, and then go to bed. And, that's how I wasn't like a daily drinker, like a partier at that age, but I would do swigs
Mhm.
every night to help me go to sleep, to be okay with the events of the day or how my head was. Um, so for you, it was getting out of hand. It was that progression then. Now, we met in the Swifties group, right?
Yeah.
How long have you been part of that group?
I'd say a little over a year and a half now. I I went to a couple of meetings. I spoke there once because for whatever reason I'm a Taylor Swift fan, and there's a lot of music I can relate to. Of course, active addiction, but also then my recovery. That's just
Yeah.
motivational to me. And you're gonna probably laugh at this. They got a kick out of it. The women that were on there, even a couple of the men. When we get into some really heavy trauma stuff or shame coming up for people, I'll put on Taylor Swift "Shake It Off" and I'll start dancing and invite them to, and just get the body moving, get that energy out, and the clients get such a kick out of it when we do it, and you can
Hmm.
even people that don't like or get into it, and just
Yeah.
it's people that are, it's just you can see them doing it with all their heart. And one of the things I found that's been really healing for shame is that deep belly laughter, not that
Yep.
superficial laughter, but let's get down into the belly, let's get these things
Yeah.
breaking up so it can start to move around. And it's just one of those things. As you'll get to hear, I also do sound baths. I've developed a huge collection of like 10 bowls and a custom gong a guy in Colorado made for me. It's pure titanium with no
It's
hammer
awesome.
work. I mean,
Yeah.
I it's taxing for me. Don't get me wrong. When I get done with one of these things, I'm probably drinking a gallon to 2 gallons of water because I am pouring sweat. Doesn't matter if the AC is on or it's hot. I'm pouring sweat. It's just one of those things. I love looking into a what people's experiences are, b what the science says. And I get a lot of, you'd almost say, free reign to do whatever groups I want. The company really trusts me and loves me. It's a incredible place. And how I come up with a group is I don't just come up with something because it's been published. I'll take a look at it. I look for three things that can back it up. And then I look at myself and I ask, is that my experience? And if
Yeah.
it's not my experience, I really want to start asking myself those deeper questions like we're taught to in recovery, to see, is it because I'm in denial? Or is it possibly just because it's not my experience? Because one of the things I have learned, unfortunately through experience, but I've also seen in other therapists, is clients can read immediately when somebody is reading off a piece of paper and they have not had that experience. And for
Oh
me,
yeah.
I find it highly dangerous to take a client somewhere I haven't been. I guess that's also where all of the wonderful life experiences I've chosen and been given have benefited me. There's very few things, unfortunately, I haven't experienced.
Yeah.
So, it just makes you more well rounded. And I'm not saying all therapists need to be. That's just for me. And that's just so I can feel okay in myself with what I'm doing.
Yeah, a lot of addicts can pick up when someone's being disingenuous. I feel like part of being an active addiction is reading the people around you and body language and, what you're saying when you're not saying it
Yeah.
to kind of hide and shield, and protect yourself in addiction. So when you first, get into recovery, you're so sensitive to everything around you, where you can feel those kind of things that you want to be able to trust the person that's running a group, whether you're in intensive outpatient and IOP, or whether you're running a group inside of a treatment center, especially because that's when they're the most sensitive
Hmm.
and they're the most, a lot of them are detoxing still. Because
Yeah.
shit, I was detoxing for a couple of weeks, because I was refusing Suboxone and I was refusing any kind of, I was taking gabapentin was the only thing that I was taking. Besides that, though, I was refusing any kind of, medications,
Comfort.
a couple of opiates.
Yeah. The comfort meds. Yeah.
The comfort, yeah. The only one I was taking was gabapentin, and that was it. I took trazodone for the sleep med for 2 nights, and I hated it. And so I just dealt with everything else as it came. And I remember them saying, why don't you take the Suboxone? And I was like, because I don't want to be comfortable. I was like, if I'm comfortable with how I feel, because I was in rehab because I wanted to go to rehab. No one was making me go. So I was like, if I make this too comfortable, I'm going to be okay with coming back.
And that's a common thing we hear from clients. However, there's certain cocktails we're finding out on the street now that we really can't allow them to do it. Like another one that's more recent is the new souped up version of the kratom, the 7 O's. The detox is possibly worse than coming off of alcohol. So to not allow them to be medically stabilized as they're coming down, I mean, I haven't seen anything written yet that people have died from it, but I could see it as a possibility because now we're getting out of kratom and we're getting into synthetic engineering, and when things are synthetically engineered, all bets are off. Like I've heard a number of people say that the simplest detox, whether you want to believe this or not, is pharmaceutical grade fentanyl because it's designed to enter the system and leave the system, and there's no derivatives
Mm-hmm.
versus being cooked on the street or coming from the super labs in China or Mexico.
Yeah.
God only knows what it's getting cut with or how it's being processed. So it's the kind of piece that comes in, and I get it. The people are like, I want to feel the brunt of this so that I don't have to do it again. And I
Yeah.
can remember I went through a couple of those phases in treatment, and I would say I possibly regretted them because I was nowhere near done. I also grateful to hear you. Doesn't sound like you've ever had one of those less than human detoxes. Those suck. You feel less than human. It's almost like you can't die, but you want to die.
No, yeah. I mean, I had been through, over 9.5 years, I had gone through a lot of instances where I ran out of money and I couldn't get Suboxone on the street and I didn't have a Suboxone doctor at all in this time where I had to just like kind of grit my teeth and get through it. But I wasn't done using it. Just meant I didn't have any money to buy more at this time.
Yeah.
And I knew every single time that it wasn't going to physically kill me. I had stopped drinking by the time I got into opiates because there was nothing that was as good as this in my mind. And I knew, and I was worried about Xanax because I was prescribed Xanax and I kept running out my script every 2 weeks. And, the two things that you can 100% die from withdrawing are alcohol and Xanax,
Yes.
benzos.
Yep.
And, the 7 is so dangerous. I've heard horror stories. I'm in like a drug humor group on Facebook, Dark Side of the Spoon. And, it's all drug memes and stuff like that. But it's also a lot of people in active addiction
Mm-hmm.
and they post about 7-0 all the time. Questions: can I take this with Suboxone? Can I do this or that? Advice. And there's people in the comments like, dude, this is worse than fentanyl.
Yeah.
Like, coming off this has been worse for me than kratom, worse than fentanyl, worse than anything. Do not take 7-0. And it's, I don't want to like promote it, but like, you can buy this shit at smoke shops and online
Mm-hmm.
in most states.
Yeah.
And have it shipped right to your door. And it's more dangerous than, most street drugs as of right now. And, and that says a lot, considering I'm from the Philly area where Trank really started from.
Mm-hmm.
Kensington is like the epicenter for horse tranquilizer, for people using what's the technical word for it?
Dilazine.
Dilazine, thank you. And I've had people on the show from Kensington, almost losing limbs from injecting it. One girl I knew from growing up spent years on the street in Kensington, almost lost her foot. And, I from what I've heard, because I never used it, but once you use Trank, there's no going back to fentanyl. Fentanyl doesn't take away the withdrawals.
So, not a doctor or anything. My understanding is it does something to the receptors inside of the brain where fentanyl can never, but can no longer penetrate in the
Yeah,
way it used to, because some of the things are left on the residue of the receptor, and it no longer kicks the brain into the gear that we're talking about. And if you understand the threshold of tolerance, it's like kind of, so you start with alcohol, 100% dopamine hit increase, sex 200, cocaine 400 the first time, but then it drops back. Then you get into like your Ritalin, Adderall, Vyvanse at 1,000, meth at 1,300. Well, if you start combining these things, or we could even get into watching pornography or doom scrolling or playing video games, these are constant releases. But the more you add on top of it, you kick up above that level. But then the law of diminishing returns kicks in, and you can never re-experience it the way you want unless you've combined all these things again. And these other acts that you may have been doing no longer bring you satisfaction. And then, of course, when the brain stops producing dopamine altogether, you get into where people will develop anhedonia, where they can have no pleasure or reward. Or the other piece that people don't get into a lot with dopamine, it's not just pleasure and reward, it's motivation. You and me wouldn't be on this show today if we did not get some form of dopamine today, because that drives motivation.
yeah. No, and that's the truth. I mean, that's why I do this. I'm motivated to, put stories out there. Like I said before we even started rolling, I don't get paid to do these. I pay to use this platform every week. And it's my way of putting people's stories out there and putting information out there, because I wish I would have discovered stuff like this when I was still in addiction. Because, like, as you know, one of the things is like, well, nobody has my story. Nobody will understand because nobody's ever lived a day in my shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone feels that way in addiction, and you feel really isolated and alone. And, I discovered 12 steps first. Both of them, AA and NA, at the same time in Los Angeles, where I got clean in 2018. The treatment center took us to both meetings all the time outside the rehab. And I remember being excited going to meetings because it meant getting out of the house, and then it gets you excited to go to a meeting. And I wasn't really, the first week of going to meetings, it was more like, oh, look at that cute girl, and like, I can feel like I'm human and be outside the house.
Yeah.
And then I was sitting in a meeting, and this guy Nikolai, I'm friends with him to this day. 7 years later, he was the speaker at the podium, and I know exactly where I was sitting in the room. I was at a Marina Del Rey in Los Angeles on the west side, 8:00 meeting. It might have been a Tuesday or a Monday, and I remember sitting there. And he said something in the beginning where I was like, oh, I'm the oldest of three, where like it caught my attention.
Yep.
And then he said, well, I did this. And then I was like, I did that. And then he started talking. I was like, I did that too. Like I felt that way. And I heard my story being told for the first time.
Yep.
From a podium. And then I was hooked on 12 steps. I was hooked on recovery, There wasn't a meeting you could keep me out of. I was a junkie and going to meetings and learning
Yeah.
about myself, taking suggestions, and that dopamine hit was right there on everything that I was learning about myself for the first time in my life at 31 years old. And I was excited about doing this. And then I ended up becoming, I sought friendship from him. Weeks later, when I saw him again at another meeting, I was like, listen, like, you changed my outlook, and we're still friends to this day. I don't live anywhere near Los Angeles,
Mhm.
but we remain friends to this day. And it's stuff like that you don't, for me, I never forgot.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's important for me to like put these stories out there for somebody else to maybe, and at first, because we talked about before we got on, like being numbers guys.
Hmm.
Um, when I first started this, I was all about like, oh, where are my numbers at? Where are my number? How many viewers am I getting? And I would get disgruntled. I would like, oh man, that one didn't hit, as many viewers. And I was like, do I even continue doing this shit? Like, it's just, I'm just really in my head about it. And then I got a message, like in the middle of the night, because I have a severe insomnia, and I'm not just throwing those words around. I've suffered from severe insomnia for a long time.
Cool.
And this girl messaged me that I didn't know. It popped up on my Instagram DMs like as a request, like we're not friends or anything. And she said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I discovered your show through you interviewed Abby, I think her name was, and I just watched another 4 episodes of yours. I'm going to go to rehab tomorrow, and I just wanted to let you know."
Freaking awesome.
And that's carried me on since. And I'm friends with that girl, Chloe. If she's watching this, I don't know. But we're still friends on Instagram to this day, 4 years later. And that's kept me going this entire, and I've gotten other messages since then, similar. But it was that first one. I was like, okay, this is more than just moving the needle numbers wise. This is about connecting with that one person and trying to find that one person to connect with each time.
Oh yeah.
So, I don't, and that's why I try to have people from all over the world on both shows to put out different stories and for, different people to connect with, because everyone does have different kinds of journeys through, their experience. Now, what got you into like doing trauma? Because like your background was more in like
Hmm.
business, and then you got sober. What got you into trauma, Matt?
Addiction. A lot of my trauma was caused in active addiction, and unfortunately, even in some treatment centers. Um, I I was one of those people, buddy. If you want the numbers, I went to 58 inpatient treatment centers, 112 psych wards, detoxes, and emergency rooms. And it still brings pain to say that today, that that's what it took, because each one of those times I went in, when my dad was alive, he had hope. And my mom was alive for every single one of them, and she had hope I was going to change. That even when I got out of the last one, and my sponsor informed me, "You're going to call her every day because you love her," and I was like, "Yeah." At every point in time for a number of months in the conversation went something like this: JD, are you giving up? Are you coming home? And she has every right. In fact, I look at it as that's one of the most loving things she can ask, because that's how I trained her to treat me, is because I haven't shown her I can do this. And her love of me is killing her, because she wants to help me, but she can't help me. As you and me both know, with addicts, the families can't do much except just be there for us.
Yeah.
And love us, hopefully stop enabling us. If you've ever dealt with enablement, I was really good at that. And what you were mentioning though with that stories, so for me, the last treatment center I went to, I'd been through the big book, the NA book, even a little bit of the ACA book, but I didn't pay any attention to it. I go into it now on my own. Um, it was this man I met on day two that really cared about me, but at the same time, he's like, "You're going to make a decision." And he said, "What's your struggle?" I said, "Man, I've been through this before. I've heard it all before." And he introduced me to a prayer called the Set Aside Prayer, which you can find online. And he said, "I want you to pray this 5 times a day. And if you need to pray it more, pray it more." And I had an entirely new experience with 12 step recovery. And then it was that weekend we went to a meeting in Nashville at 202, and this woman was sharing her story. And at the beginning, I heard something that just, it hooked me. And it simply was this, you know, my first experience with getting high, or, having that release feeling when I was 6 years old, and I'd take my book and I'd run outside and climb the tree, and I'd read that book and I'd escape. And that was, like you mentioned yours, that connected with me. And there's an incredible book out there I really love. I believe it's called The Spirituality of Imperfection by Robert Kuntz and Angela Devers. And it's about the origins of spirituality from an oral perspective. And the story that you just shared is one of the stories not having to do with 12-step recovery, because it does talk about 12-step recovery in there at the end. But it's about this bishop that witnesses something, and the man tells him, you're going to go around and you're going to share your story until you hear your story said back to you. And that's essentially what we do in in recovery, is we share our story and somebody hears a piece of it and they go, that's me too. And
Yep.
when that happens, that builds this immediate focus and concentration with the person. And if somebody's ever struggling to get into something, one of the methods that I use is I ask myself, okay, what don't I like about this, and how am I looking at it? How could I become curious about this? Because I find when I have curiosity, I get focus for free and I become fascinated, and I'm allowed to dive deeper and deeper into these things. And sometimes I even access a flow state where time slows down or speeds up, and I just get to experience. And I love to study quantum physics and neuroscience as well. So you'll hear how I got into trauma as well in a moment here.
Hmm.
And I have to set a timer for an hour when I get a new book, because I could read that entire book, because I'm
Yeah.
still obsessive, in my thinking. And nothing gets done that really needed to get done. And that doesn't work for me. So it's kind of a reward system now. I'll sit down, I'll do my prayer, my meditation, maybe play a game for a few minutes. Okay, I'm going to read this book for an hour. And when that hour's up, I'm going to go do a few of the things I need to do. And if I have some time left over, I can go back to the book. But it's one of those things that I can still become obsessive today, 6 years in. And it's one of those things. Can I take a look at myself? Can I have that awareness? Or as another 12-step program calls it, that vigilance. Can I hold myself with vigilance to what works for me and what I also know are still places I can easily struggle? So the question on the trauma was, how we were talking about, I, it, simply put, after I gave you those numbers, I went to about 20 treatment centers saying I wasn't an alcoholic, I wasn't an addict. These people don't know what they're talking about. I just got to get out here and make this move. I just got to do this differently. I can even remember going to 7 treatment centers in less than a period of 9 months, bud. Going with why my heroin maintenance program didn't work. So I just need to tweak this. I'd sit there for 30, 40 more days, the whole time being that A+ student in treatment, but deep down inside already knowing the moment I get out of here, this is what we're going to do, and this is going to work this time. And
'Cause we know exactly what we need to say in order for somebody to be like, okay, well, they're ready.
yep.
You know, you know how to manipulate the situation
Oh yeah.
to, and I completely see that. And the thing about the stories is so important to me. Like I host, and I'll say NA. I do that 7 days a week on Zoom at 9 p.m. Eastern. It's based out of California, is my home group. And, I'm of service. I co-host a lot. And then I host every Thursday night. And when I took it over, the hosting duties, the format is different every night. And the format was on Thursday nights was we read a chapter from It Works How and Why, which I like. It's a
Mhm.
good reading. But I found it, I don't know, we do book studies, we do a lot of different readings. And I was like, we don't have any speaker meetings in this home group. So I during a business meeting, I was just like, hey, I need to change my format. I need to mix it up. I was like, I want to bring back speaker meetings, and hold a speaker meeting once a week and have a speaker come in, from either the home group or, I have a big network of people outside the home group from my years of recovery and doing this show, and speak for 20 minutes and allow us to break one of the IPs and do crosstalk. And do a little bit of a crosstalk meeting where, say you shared, Matt, and I'm like, oh, I related to this, that, and the third. And I appreciate you coming on because I related to you for this reason.
Mhm.
Usually you can't do that in a meeting because it's crosstalk.
Yeah.
But I find it's important in a speaker meeting to crosstalk, to be like I was engaged in everything you said because of X, Y, and Z, and not despite of.
Mhm.
not in spite of. So, and they were like, "Hey, it's your meeting. Run it, run how you want to." And I love it now.
I love that too, because I just shared my story on Thursday, and there were a number of people that stuck around afterwards because this was a traditional 12-step meeting
Hmm.
that wanted to ask questions. But there's been a couple of treatment centers I've volunteered to go out to, or there's been a couple of meetings that have asked me to come out and said, "Hey, one thing we want to do though is we want to save 10 minutes at the end for people to be able to ask questions." I'm like, "Cool, I'm good with
Yeah,
that." I love that groups are willing to, it's one of those things, traditions that says they can do whatever they want within the group as long as it doesn't affect the fellowship as a whole. And it's
yeah.
one of those things, how quickly we can forget our own traditions. And it's so many people become, just enamored in these things, and they don't grasp that the goal possibly is to continue to evolve within the spiritual principles. These are the guidelines. These are not set in stone. These
Yeah.
are the things that hold us together, but also allow us to be together.
It sounds like when it comes to your recovery, you're more of like the academic where you want to learn about all the different modalities and not just feel like there's one.
Well, I would say for my recovery, it's based in 12 steps. I have a sponsor that I still call daily. He likes to joke about. He's like, we tell people to call daily, and people stop pretty quickly. He's like, he still calls me daily, and he doesn't always pick up, but I'm cool with that. I was never told not to, so
Yeah.
I guess you would say what I would put it as. I heard a man say this recently, and it really resonated with me again. He's like, "Am I still convinced that I could die if I don't do this?" And I am. It's one of those things. Do I want to live, or am I going to die? Well, I'm going to die one day, but however, it's one of those things. Can I die in a manner of joy, of leaving behind not necessarily a legacy, but leaving behind love? Because for the
Mm,
longest time in my life, I was not spreading love. I was probably ripping love out and spreading anger and hate. And
yeah.
today, love is the basis for all for me. And, it's one of those things. When you asked me about this, I prayed about it real quick, and I asked myself, what's the most loving thing? And I waited a little bit, and it was like, okay, this is this, because sometimes there's clarity. And when I get clarity, it's time to make a decision. Or as my sponsor likes to tell me, if you pray about something, you don't have clarity, that means the decision doesn't need to be made today. And if you're making the decision today, you've taken back your third step decision, and what's going to happen is going to happen. Can I continue to seek conscious contact with what I choose to believe in today? And it's a powerful thing, and it really comes into how I started to address trauma. So the last treatment center I was at was kind of like a 12-step boot camp. It's an incredible place. However, they don't get into mental health. They don't get into trauma. And when I got out of there, I had, gotten physically sober. I was nowhere near emotionally sober. Let's make sure I put that out there. I was still
Yeah.
wild, crazy, insane. Still am insane. Not crazy so much, but it was one of those things that started to come to the surface. And the sponsor I had at that time came to me and he said, you're not going to make it unless we start looking at these things. And we did a different kind of 4-step to really kind of reveal where there could be trauma. He changed a few of the questions, and I'm grateful he did that. However, it really put me in that place again, that the reason we don't see people able to admit they're an alcoholic or an addict, and this is one of my gripes about some treatment centers that tell people they need to introduce themselves that way. I don't ask people to do that whatsoever, because it's a decision that needs to come to themselves. And if they're forced to, they're just going to create resistance and barriers.
Yeah.
Versus I ask them, can you just say your name and you're grateful to be there? I
Yeah.
mean, let's not force people. When we're forced, we resist. As
Yeah.
Carl Jung said it best, that which I resist shall forever persist. So it's one of those things that the thing about trauma was, the moment I admitted it was real, I knew deep down inside there was a lot of it. And it gotten to that point of, where do I begin? It wasn't just one bubble was rising to the top, it was 20 or 30. And it finally blew up, and as those bubbles started to overtake me, the first one, of course, had to do with the arm. But also, 9 months into recovery, I went blind in one eye, and a month later I went completely blind. That's more trauma on top of the trauma you're already trying to work on. My first sponsor pretty much disappeared. However, there were men that worked at that treatment center that were there to listen to me and support me. And I do not disparage my sponsor whatsoever. He kind of quit picking up the phone, possibly because he felt he was out of his depth. I love the man. He did everything he could for me, and he guided me on the path that I needed to find. And it's one of those things that those other men kind of guided and directed me when he in his absence. And I've basically got to a place. I told someone, hey, I haven't talked to my sponsor in probably 4 weeks, and he hasn't answered my text in 2 weeks. And the man looked at me and he said, sounds like you're sponsoring yourself, and that could be a life or death decision. I prayed about it. Two people came to mind, and I just made the decision right there. The time I see either one of those people, that's the person I'm going to ask. And I asked that person, and the other person's become very tight knit with me in my support network, and it's worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. And it's one of those things. Can I see that there is absolutely nothing wrong with the decisions I make? It's only a question of, is there going to be a greater lesson, or the only way I found this program works is either I practice spiritual principles or I learn through pain. There are no in betweens.
Yeah.
It's
Well, there's
either
two
you
things you can't
practice or
do.
pain.
You can't be your own sponsor, and you can't be your own therapist.
Yes.
Because I spent years trying to be my own therapist, because, and my grandmother, 89 now, used to always tell me, even growing up, you're too smart for your own good.
Yeah.
And, even when I got clean, 7 years ago, she told me that. She's like, you're too smart for your own good. You keep yourself doing the wrong things because you think you know better, and you think you're smarter than everybody else, and you're the smartest person in every room, and you can get yourself out of every situation. I'm like, damn, this woman can see right through me. Like, she is calling me out on my shit. And the way I look at it now, even the toughest guys out there, I grew up on Jersey mafia movies and mafia shit. Like, even Tony Soprano needed a fucking therapist.
Mm-hmm.
You need it. Like, everyone should be in therapy. If you think you're too tough, look at Tony Soprano. Needed a psychotherapy. Needed a psychiatrist. What was this? Psychiatrist.
I think it was a psychotherapist.
That
Because she
she
was,
prescribed him medications.
yeah,
So
that would be a psychiatrist, not a psychologist.
yeah,
Psychiatrist prescribe medication.
yes, exactly. Yep. It's funny, real quick. So I work in healthcare now. I do a scheduling for a hospital system for like orthopedics and podiatry. And there's this girl, we became friends who had the same birthday. And we were talking, and I had just helped her get into therapy through the same company I use for my therapy. And she was complaining, and she's like, I got a psychiatrist now, but I don't like her. I want to get a new psychiatrist because all she wants to do is prescribe me meds. And I was like, well, they're psychiatrists. That's their job, is to figure out which meds. It's like, every psychiatrist you get, they're gonna want to prescribe you meds. It sounds like you just want a therapist, which is okay. Just the therapist will never prescribe you meds because that's not their job. But a psychiatrist, every single one of them, their job is to figure out what is wrong in your head and how we're going to prescribe you meds to fix that.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I never knew that. I'm like, that's the difference between a I mean, degrees. Yeah, there's degrees. People go to school differently for each one. But like, at the end of the day, in layman's terms, one gives you meds and one gives you advice.
Yeah. Okay. I know a lot of them do that. I just don't like that word. I find advice and opinions have no place in the therapy room to me. What I'm more of a person of, I tell my clients I'm a resource, and I'm going to
Okay.
ask you some questions, and I'm going to ask you what you're willing to do. And then we're going to ask ourselves, what's that going to look like? What do we need to do to prepare to take that step? What are the pitfalls you see? What are the pros and cons to these things? And I'm a huge proponent of, there is no external solution to an internal problem. Now, I do believe medications are important to help take the edges off. However,
Yeah.
to find balance, it's going to be what you do.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that some of the most pain I feel in the job I have today is when I hear the person who tells me, well, this med's going to fix me. I really don't need this to do with this other stuff. And all I can do is pray for them, because maybe it's going to work for them. I don't know. However, my experience and what I've seen and experienced in others, it doesn't. That's not to say it couldn't. I'm not here to say I know anything or everything. It's just I stick to my experience and where things have taken me, and in the developing of my own writings is It's one of those things that I have also found knowledge is the most dangerous barrier to wisdom there is. I find knowledge is an external experience. What I find fits is what's alluded to in the St. Francis prayer. It's understanding.
Yeah,
Understanding comes from within. And it's one of those things. Knowledge can get you so far. However, too much knowledge can get you killed.
yeah.
And
And you're right about the medications, because I'm bipolar,
Mhm.
and so when there's such a spectrum, I'll start there. Bipolar is such a spectrum. I first started learning what bipolar was in 2012. I started dating a girl that I grew up with. Me and her were best friends growing up, and she was bipolar schizophrenic. And I said was because she took her own life in 2015 from this disease. Well, from that disease. She was an alcoholic, what I would call a garden variety drunk, drank a bottle of wine a day to make the voices go away kind of thing. And that's when I started learning what bipolar was. And then when she died, I took it personally and really spiraled for years, blaming myself into my addiction, medicating with alcohol, cocaine, pills, whatever could take away my thoughts. You know what I mean? I was going to medicate with for years. And now it's been a decade, and it was a decade a few weeks ago, and I was able to get through that. And, it sucks, but there's nothing I can do. But I started learning what bipolar was. And then I was diagnosed bipolar a few years ago by, a new psychiatrist. They're like, we're going to try. And the problem is there's so many different kind of medications
Yeah.
because of the spectrum of bipolar is. And so they can get you on the right cocktail. But the problem is I still deal with mania.
Mm-hmm.
I still deal with depression. Just because you got me medicated right doesn't mean it's going to be perfect day in and day out, week in and week out. We're talking right now, it's August 2nd, and I'm not sure when this is going to come out, maybe later in the month, early September. But last week, I woke up at 6 a.m. for work. I work 7 to 6:30, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday from home. I woke up at 6 a.m. for work on a Monday. I worked all day. I did my NA meetings, blah, 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 blah. Fell asleep at 11:30 at night. Woke up at 12:30 an hour later, and then I didn't fall back asleep again until 2 a.m. Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking 4 or 5 days straight of being awake, just manic. Didn't miss a minute of work. I quit drinking coffee 40 days ago, so I didn't drink coffee to get me through the day. I only drink energy drinks on the weekends when I do podcasts. I don't drink them while I work.
Mm-hmm.
I just drink water. That's it. And I don't drink soda. It's big. I quit drinking soda unless I'm getting the only time I drink soda is when I get fast food. But I don't drink soda at home. We don't keep it in the house. And so I got through that week on just straight mania. And then when mania ends, for me, in my experience, the crash comes and then the depression rises.
Mm-hmm.
And I was depressed as fuck for 3 or 4 days last week, getting through Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I do therapy as individual every other Wednesday, and then I do couples therapy every other Wednesday. They all set with my wife and I. We started doing couples therapy after my gambling problem really hit its head last summer, which was really good for us to get through, because gambling's financial, the money, and then all that kind of stuff. And I haven't gambled now. It's funny. I was in GA earlier this morning. I do GA every Saturday and Sunday, and I share at every meeting just because I find it's important to share for myself, for my recovery. And every meeting I go to, I share. And a lot of times I have no idea what I'm going to say. I just start talking and let myself just get whatever's that off there. And I said, JD, and I'm an addict. Nope, I'm a compulsive gambler right now. I'm an addict later. And I always say, and every time someone asks me, what was your drug of choice? That's a popular question when I do this show is, what's your drug of choice? Because I want to know if I can connect to you. Or, when I'm speaking in a 12-step program, what's your drug of choice? And my drug of choice is, it's simple. It's the word more. Mm-hmm. More of whatever is filling that void, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's coffee, whether it's gambling, whatever is hitting that in that moment, that's what I'm addicted to. And, I quit smoking cigarettes July 1st or January 1st. And, it's been 7-8 months since I picked up a cigarette, and I smoked cigarettes a pack or two a day daily for 25 years. And I used the patch for 10 days, and then I said, I'm done. I'm done with the patches. I'm done with nicotine. I've never got into vaping because I don't know how to vape. I just know how to smoke a cigarette. I can't even smoke. I could never even smoke a cigar. My dad used to love having a cigar when he was alive. And my brother never really got into smoking anything ever. Never picked up a cigarette in his life. He's 35, never touched a cigarette. But he liked smoking cigars with my dad when my dad was alive. And we would sit on the back deck when we owned a company together, all three of us. Like I said earlier, I was in Fort Wayne for that company for our franchise. And we all lived together as roommates, which was fun. It's a different dynamic living with your dad and brother as roommates and not like as brother and dad. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And they would smoke cigars after a long day, and I would just chain smoke my cigarettes because I don't know how to not inhale. These are two people that never smoked a cigarette a day in their lives, and I've only smoked cigarettes. So I would have to smoke cigarettes while they smoked their cigars because they could puff a cigar. And I can't. I would inhale an entire cigar and then be dying by the end of it. So I would just smoke cigarettes with them. But man, I'm happy that I made it this far now. And it's, in July, I was like, I'm drinking too much coffee. I'm drinking 10 to 14 cups a day. And, I'm not losing weight. I'm trying to lose weight. And it's because of how much creamer. Like, wait, this was my coffee cup. I'm at my work desk, This is my coffee cup, and up to here will be cream. French vanilla creamer up to here, man. And this would all be coffee right here. And I would drink 4 of these sometimes during a 12-hour shift. Sometimes five. And, because I work from home, like I said, this is my workspace. And, I have behind me is my little podcast, little studio enclosure. And this is my work area, my 2 monitors for work. And I got my little shrine from my dad over in this corner with his ashes and his watch and all of his office stuff. And it's my little sanctuary. And, you had mentioned laughter earlier. Before I forget, it's really funny you mentioned that because that manufactured laugh over that real belly laugh you had mentioned, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
And I checked it off in my head to bring this back up now eventually is towards the end of my addiction to opiates, I was doing stand-up comedy. It's how I discovered podcasts originally was through comedians and watching their podcasts. And I still watch comedians' podcasts daily while I work. And I was doing stand-up 3-4 nights a week around Philly and Harrisburg. And I was broken inside. I could not laugh like a real like I thought I was laughing at these comedians whenever I would hear other comedians do their spiel and do their 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I thought I was laughing going to comedy shows. And, I was 31, almost 32 years old and been around comedy, grew up. My dad was a great, like I said, movies earlier, but he also introduced me to people like George Carlin. When I was like 10 years old, he let me like watch George Carlin specials at a young age. And I remember watching David Letterman. Like I said, I'm an insomniac. My dad would let me stay awake with him and watch the top 10 list and the monologue of David Letterman every single night. And, I hold on to these memories. So I've always loved comedy. And then, addiction happens and like you break. I broke. I'll say that. I broke personally. And I was doing comedy and I thought I was laughing and having a good time. And then I got clean and I was in a treatment center and I laughed for the first time in like 20 years. Yeah. Where with my, like you said, a belly laugh, I laughed with my stomach where I felt that shit in my stomach for the first time since I was a kid. And I was like, oh my God, that is what laughter is.
Yep.
That's what that joy is, of like childlike wonder. Like that is what laughter should be. What was I doing for all these years in comedy and wasting it away with these fake manufactured laughs just to like keep up appearances that you were happy?
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment I was like, this is what I need to like. And I haven't really done comedy in recovery because I don't like being around those rooms as much anymore, because of it brings me back to like doing lines in the bathroom and doing shots before going up on stage. And it's just not for me anymore, and I find my solace in doing this instead. And
JD, you open to a suggestion? Because
yeah.
I do a little bit of this with clients, and sometimes there's a couple treatment centers that ask me to do this too. Why don't you put out a thing on Facebook or to your people and say, hey, I'm going to do 30 minutes of stand up recovery humor. And is there anybody else that would like to do 5 or 10 minutes, and just set it up on one of your things, and let some people get that out. And it also gets you an opportunity to sit down and look at that 12-step humor you got. And it doesn't have to be 12-step, it can be recovery oriented on many of these things. Give that creativity and expression, or this is what I say, you pivot the assets you had from before into the things you do today.
Well, it's funny you say that, is because I did do that about 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
Um, you know, in the literature I use personally in how it works, in the section how it works that we read every meeting, it's one of the lines, famous lines in it, is alcohol is a drug, period.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard that line because
Mhm.
that's what we talk about in my 12 steps. And when I say I mean the one I subscribe to and the one I attend.
All good.
Um, so I started a thing, and I had the page. I still even have it, I think. I'm on Instagram is where I started it, and it's laughter is a drug, period.
Yeah.
And it was like my twist, laughter is a drug, period. And I would post, my own stuff, my own stories. I would create memes every single day. I had like 2 or 3 or 4,000 people following the page. I would find other comedians that talked about recovery doing like stand up bits, and I would post them on the page. And it was TikTok I used too. I used TikTok and Instagram, and I would put out other comedian stuff talking about recovery and their bits. I would, like I said, I would create memes. One of my first memes I ever created around addiction and recovery, and I still remember it. I was so happy when I discovered it, because I was looking for something to really hit it going, and it was you've seen Shawshank?
Yeah.
Okay, so in Shawshank, there's that scene when Morgan Freeman and the other guys are standing against the wall, and Andy Dufresne's bus is pulling in for the first
Mhm.
time early on in the movie, and they're all standing up against the wall and kind of smirking because they're waiting for the fresh meat to come off the bus, and they're all taking bets. And I wrote something like, in this meme, I wrote, the old timers waiting the 13th step, the newcomer coming off the bus. And and that was like the first meme I created for laughter is a drug, period. And it was just the old timers waiting a 13. And for people that don't know, a 13th step is somebody who is hitting on a newcomer and trying, whether it's a guy or girl hitting on a newcomer. That's the 13th step, that the dreaded 13th step that makes us look bad. That kept my wife away from the program. My father-in-law's got 35, 36 years in sobriety. And my wife and I quit drinking on Leap Day of 2020. And February 29th was my original sober day from drinking. It still is my original sober day from drinking. And my wife needed to go into meetings, and I can out them because they do. They've been on my show a bunch of times. But then they discovered Recovery Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
Ever hear of Recovery Dharma?
Yeah, there's a couple of meetings down here. I've read the books.
Yeah, they do. It's a Buddhist approach to recovery.
Mhm.
And They do 5, 6, 7 meetings a week.
Recovery.
What's that?
Refuge recovery is what came first, and then
Yep.
kind of an internal split within the group, and
Yep.
Dharma recovery came about. So there's generally a 10 or 15 minute meditation, depending on the group, sometimes 20, 30 minute. And it kind of gets people more in touch with themselves so that what does become shared is more from the heart than the head. And they a lot of different things they do there, but it's a really beautiful program.
Yeah, my wife is like licensed meditation special, like where they can run meditations and they created their own meditation earlier. They make their own meditations. My wife has a very soothing voice, so it works very well for meditations and doing guided meditations. And they're on the council, like they're pretty high up in recovery Dharma. I'm not gonna lie, they're part of the council, the committee that does everything, and they just got back from being in Chicago for a week for a big summit for recovery Dharma a few weeks ago, which was a huge test to me because it was my first time alone in 6 years.
Yep.
And I had to deal with, I mentioned my first fiance's suicide. The 10-year anniversary was while my wife was away. And I had to, and part of my trauma is grief and loss. And I had to learn on that Saturday, I celebrated a year without a bet. And then that Sunday was 10 years without Colleen. And I went from of course, I'm bipolar. I went from a very happy day on Saturday, celebration, to a very, grief-stricken day. But one of the first things I learned in recovery when it comes to grief is reach out to other people because they might need you more than you need yourself in that moment. And to talk to other people because other people need help too and want to have somebody to talk to about that person. So, but
what you just talked about there is a huge part of my story. After my dad died, that's where it kicked off, going to like 20 treatment centers in 2 years. And I was telling people my dad had just died, and people were telling me that wasn't my problem. I was running into a lot of 12-step therapists or more substance abuse therapists. And I got to this one treatment center in Ohio, and I'll never forget this therapist. He came up to me after we kind of met each other, and he looked at me right now. I said, "I don't care if you get over. You don't start grieving over your father, you're not going to." And he did some of the most intensive grief work with me. Of course, it wasn't done, but it opened the door to show me I could experience like shit. It's kind of like how I do trauma therapy as well. They'll lay out their narrative or the things they want to work on, and I don't actually encourage them to read it off of that sheet. What I ask them to do is to give it to me orally. And there's one catch though when people give oral trauma narratives is in our brains we want it to come out chronologically. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
It comes out by emotional impact. You might start at 5, go to 9, go to 12, come back to 7. Jump to 20, come back to 13. It's can you let them know? I'm
like a Tarantino movie, the way it jumps around.
It really is. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things. Can we give them space? And I'm a huge proponent of, I'm not going to say, I don't believe any of my clients lie to me maliciously. I mean, of course, that's not necessarily true because there are those you can tell that are just there to get over on people.
Yeah.
But what I find is we tell people the truth as we remember it or we've been told it. However, until our minds start to clear up and we get a little clarity in there and get a few things out, all of a sudden we find it may have been all intertwined in a big knot. And after we remembered it may change. And it's one of the dangers because people start to beat themselves up. Well, I lied to this man. You didn't lie to me. You told me what you believed. And some of the most powerful words you can say to somebody when they come in to share those things when they're ready. Some people have got it inside of them. It's got to be the first thing out. Some people got to build some form of rapport. I also don't ask clients to trust me. I ask them to be honest with themselves about what they're here for. And if you feel that you can be honest with me, then great. But I want you to be honest with yourself above all. And it's one of those things. 2 most powerful words are to look at them and say, I believe you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us have never heard that before. Because that's that part you were talking about. Nobody's been through what I've been through. Nobody understands what I'm going through. And it's also about not just saying it. It's about giving it that stillness or that space to say it when they're ready to hear it. Because it can be forced and it takes away the moment. But can you allow the moment to shape itself? Because I personally believe trauma work is some of the most difficult work there is. And can it be given the proper, I don't want to say levity, but I want to say, can it be given the proper attention? Can the attention be given to it so that it can be allowed to happen naturally and not forced? Because when it's forced, it's just like we talked about the laughter.
Yeah.
I'm still covering shit up. And when that's
Mhm.
being covered up, we're not getting down, or we're not allowing it to come to light. And the more I stay in that process of covering things up, I'm just going to continue to say, you know what, it's not that big of a deal. This isn't as bad as I thought it was. I'll do these other things they're talking about, but nobody's going to hear that one.
Yeah. And, the thing about grief is, it's not linear, like you said, and things pop up when they pop up, and it's not like we're hiding something. It's because you don't remember, or something happens where it like hits that chord. Because I've dealt with grief I've dealt with grief a lot, obviously, especially, I just lost somebody else this week. When you're in addiction for a long time, you meet a lot of people and you lose a lot of people. But there's been 3 deaths that have affected me very in a rough way. And one was my best friend growing up. I had 7 best friends growing up. We were kind of a group. And, my best friend John and I did everything together, some amazing memories with him. I'm the 4th in my family. He was the 4th in his family. His name was, and I don't mind saying his name because my first studio is named after him, John Johnson. And everyone always, whenever we got in trouble by the cops growing up, which was often, every cop never believed his name because he would say, "Oh, I'm John Johnson." They're like, "No, tell me your real name. Like, your name is not John Johnson." He's like, "Yep, that's my name." And he was the 4th in his family. And he died in a car accident, June 12th, 2012. And, it affected me. It still does all the time. But I had some amazing memories with him. And the first time I was in recovery, June 12th, 2018, I was about 2 months clean. And I was talking to my sponsor. I'm like, I don't know what the hell to do. It's my first time dealing with an anniversary of a death, and I don't know how to handle it. And he said, "Does he have any siblings?" And I said, "Yeah, he's got 3 sisters." He said, "Are you friends with either of them?" I said, "I'm good friends with 2 of them." He said, "Well, reach out to one of them. Talk to one of them." So I reached out to his younger sister. And now I've gotten to the point where I reach out to her every year on his anniversary, and we talk. In this past anniversary, I spent about an hour telling stories to her, that she never heard before, me and him, and some of the stuff we did together growing up that are really funny, just to make her laugh, because I knew I was hurting. If I'm hurting, she's hurting. They were very close. So that's where I learned to reach out to other people. And then that was June 12th, 2012. And my fiance, my best friend growing up, committed suicide July 13th, 2015. And I can't watch Glee. Her and I watch Glee all the time together. And to this day, I know that I can't watch Glee again because it reminds me of her. And then I realized, and it wasn't on purpose, but my wife, has MS. I think I told you that. And they have a caregiver who's here 4 days a week, and that's our best friend, also, and she's in recovery too. And I was off work, and we were like, they were like, "Let's watch Goonies." Our friend Kelsey, the caregiver, has never seen Goonies before, and my wife loves it, and I grew up loving it. And then I got really upset watching it because it reminded me of my first fiance, because we were like in 8th grade and we drank Zimas and watched Goonies. And it reminded me of that. And it got me in my feels. And my wife didn't do it on purpose, because my wife had no idea that it would do that to me. And I didn't say, hey. It was one of those things that, like, I didn't know was going to affect me in that kind of way. And it did. And then my dad, passed away 2 years ago, I woke up June 12th, 2023, mourning my friend John's death of 11 years at that point. And then 4 hours later, my dad died. My other best friend, my dad and I'm like I said, I'm the 4th in my family. That's why I'm JD. It's because I'm, nicknamed JD from being the 4th. And my dad and I thought the same, had the same obsession with numbers. My dad ran a Roto-Rooter for corporate and for his own for 20 some years. And he was obsessed with the numbers, and he always kept a scrap piece of paper in his pocket, folded up, and write down his numbers daily so he could keep track of his progress every single day. And you could say, "Hey, what you do?" And he goes, let me see. And he would pull out his numbers, and he had his numbers all underneath of his calendar, and just obsessed. And that's where I got my obsession from, with numbers and time. And that's why I have his favorite watch draped over his ashes, because, you know, he's obsessed with time and the numbers, and him and I were always about being on time for things. And, you know, that's one thing you can do. But yeah, it's, you know, grief and loss and trauma. People don't realize that grief and loss is a traumatic thing to go through.
Well, it's also, I'm a firm believer from experience and from the clients that continue to say it to me. These individuals that want to tell us it's a linear process have never experienced it, is my personal belief. I find I may start in stage 3, bump to stage 1, get to acceptance, go back to anger. I don't even know if it's ever actually complete. It's one of those things we just learn how to handle it better. But it's another thing not enough people possibly consider when we stop drinking or using. That loss is a form of grief. And you see all of those things in people in early recovery: bargaining, denial, anger, depression, and some acceptance. But they can pop out of it pretty quickly unless they're met with that compassion. You know, can they have compassion and empathy from the people around them? I'm sure you've been to the same kinds of meetings I've seen before, where you get those people that pick on the newcomers and they believe they're doing it out of love. However, one of the most common things I've heard in AA rooms for a very long time: take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth.
Yep.
That is a shame-inducing statement.
I hated that, man. I hated that
And
shit. I never said it.
And the 12-step program teaches me to be a better man than I was yesterday. Yep. And the other thing I found, that if I'm using what people used on me, I've learned absolutely nothing. I've just become another parrot and a piece of the machine. I'm not growing. In fact, I'm digressing. And it's one of those things that, you know, there are some 12-step programs that don't like me because I point these things out to them. Or I don't point them out to them. What I do is I ask them to open their books, whatever book you prescribe to, and show me where shame is a spiritual principle. And when you can do that, then we can have a conversation. However, most people just balk or get really quiet. Well, this is how my spine. And you haven't changed. So we're right back to the one thing this is all about, is changing. Yeah. And it's one of those things that these are the ways we're perpetuating train. These are the ways that are perpetuating trauma. So it's one of these things that if I say I want to be part of the healing community, am I really looking deep enough at myself and what I'm putting off? Because another thing I'm sure we hear in all the 12-step things, what I truly get to be today is an example of what it looks like to be a man who walks or lives in recovery. And when I do that, that means I am able to bring my own struggles to the table and not come off as high and mighty. That I can bring my struggles there, because guess what? I've landed on 5 things that all alcoholics and addicts struggle with: to return love for hate, to include instead of exclude, to admit when we're wrong, to continue to be capable of asking for help, and to accept the consequences of our actions and behaviors. And it is from interviewing people with 65 years to 40 years to 5 years, including myself, that is something that every alcoholic or addict is going to struggle with at least one of those at some point in time, or definitely at the beginning, a multitude of those.
Yep. And it's funny, and the grief thing, my therapist, my wife and I, we just talked about it on Wednesday, you know, because I said my depression amped up after my mania last week. And when my depression amps up, I have very vivid dreams. I did hypnotherapy for the first time for my sleep on Saturday. One old timer in my 12-step group is a hypnotherapist, and he offered to give me free sessions, you know, because of being a home group member with him. So I took it, and it works. I've been sleeping since, you know, without medications. But the first few days I had very vivid dreams. And I had a vivid dream that included my fiance and my dad, and it was not a good dream. And just a very crazy fucked up dream, and my therapist, or our therapist, because it was couples, was like, listen, you're going to bounce in and out, back and forth. There's no, you're never done grieving. It's going to bounce back into bargaining, and it's going to do that. It's going to go back and forth, and you have to each time find your way back to acceptance.
And what you're talking about there, my personal belief, why a number of therapists do not share that. I'm not saying they all don't, because I know some that do, and I love that yours did, is it's inferiority inside of themselves. Because if they can't tell this person that this is going to be complete, they don't feel okay with what they're doing.
Yeah.
And to tell, what I find even more dangerous is to lie to others, because if I'm lying to others, I'm lying to myself.
Mind yourself.
And that's the beginning of the freaking precipice fall, is when I start to believe those lies yet again. I'll give you an example about my father. I did not notice until, unfortunately, a year into recovery. My dad never called me a liar. However, he did quote Walter Scott to me maybe 1,000 to 5,000 times. What a wicked web it is we weave when we first practice to deceive. Because what he was attempting to do was to get my attention. Of course, unfortunately, it didn't happen until he was gone, but it's something that is very powerful to me, because the person I found I lied to the most was myself. And I just continue to make that web deeper and deeper. And it's funny because I did a group on that quote and a couple of other things on denial and lying. And when I got in my truck, the song by No Doubt came on, Spiderwebs.
Yeah, I know. I love it.
It was like,
Yep.
I never noticed that's what that song was about. Because it's,
Yeah.
and we have a new perception, is the question is, can we continue to have a new perception? I don't want to say one of the goals to be experienced by all people in this healing field or in the trauma field, as I see it, is to continue to be able to widen our perception and understanding of trauma. Because how quickly we become, that sounds accurate, that's what we can prove. However, we could even argue against addiction being a disease today. Some people say it's an accelerated learning program. Some people say it's a spectrum disorder. And there's science to back these things up. However, what we go back to is the AMA, the American Medical Association, whether you agree with who they are or not, have 3 criteria, which in 1971 opened the floodgates. Is it chronic? Is it progressive? Is it fatal if not treated? These are the requirements. The 4th one doesn't matter. Is it primary to be labeled a disease?
And it's right in the DCM-5.
Yeah. DSM-5 or DSM-5.
DSM-5. Yeah, DSM. Yeah.
It's okay. Who cares? Yeah. In the end, do you know you have something going on that needs to be addressed? And there's a great book by Dr. Tion Dayton that talks about trauma addiction. I think it was written in 96 or 95. And in one of the interviews that was done, they talked to 1,000 people that would admit they're alcoholics or addicts, and it was kind of a blind thing, but 97% of them admitted to some form of trauma. And it didn't have to be sexual. It didn't have to be neglect. It didn't have to be physical. We found the most common one was emotional or mental. And it's one of those things. If you've been alive in the last 5 years, you've experienced trauma. We went through a global trauma referred to as the pandemic. And some people handled it very well. However, I also know a number of people in recovery that went back out because we found out their recovery was not as solid as they thought it was. And what it really offered was, what you mentioned, you're part of a home group in California. I love that. There are so many things that so many people want to look at the negatives, but they're not capable of separating themselves from it to see how there may be things that increased and made positive in so many aspects. It's really a question of, can I look at both sides of the equation? And here's the catch: not become anchored to either one, to actually be able to ask myself those questions. Because I find when I become anchored to something, my beliefs are very capable of making me blind. And not a lot of people like those kinds of statements. However, this has been my experience, and it's the thing that I at times struggle with in doing trauma therapy. Well, this is the way it's been taught. This is the way I've done it for some. Wait a second. Every individual's trauma is different, because there's one trauma that's not necessarily about that it physically happened to me, or all trauma doesn't even have to actually happen to me. It's the individual's perception. Abandonment's the most common one. Somebody doesn't have to physically be abandoned if they perceive themselves as abandoned.
trauma can be present, and the trauma isn't the incident, it's what's left over after the incident. It's the wound that's left, that all of a sudden my core beliefs no longer align with me. So the empty material, or the, the good old supercomputer idea, hard drives, start being deleted, and the only thing that can fill in that information is the biased information about myself, which is, for most people, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And then all of my beliefs become infected and incapable of being able to sustain me. And this is how the world can start to fill me in. And I start caring about what the world tells me, because I become malleable to what the world wants me to be. And I lose my creativity, I lose my imagination, I lose my intuition, and I become what the world tells me to be instead of finding out who I am to be.
Yeah.
I
And
went
you
on a
had,
little bit of a rant there. I apologize.
no, it's fine. No, definitely. And you reminded me, I got two things before we wrap,
No problem.
which is, the pandemic. Like I said earlier, I quit drinking on Leap Day 2020 with my wife. That was February 29th, 2020. March 13th, 2 weeks later, 13 days later, world shut down. March 12th, the world shut down. And so at that point, I felt alienated from AA because I was still smoking weed every day. The rehab I went to in Los Angeles was called High Sobriety. I specifically chose that one in LA because it used cannabis to get off of opiates instead of, Suboxone. That was my maintenance program, was cannabis. And it worked for a long time until it didn't. And then, I haven't smoked weed since April 1st of 2024. So it's been over 14 months since I've smoked weed. And my wife eventually quit too. But we used cannabis to get through our recovery. And this podcast started because in 2021, the summer of 2021, we had started a meeting center for addiction and recovery in our small town, where it held AA, it held NA, it held mental health, it held Al-Anon, it held LGBTQ, it held all these teenage LGBTQ. We had all these different meetings all day long, every single day. And as a way to try to fund the meeting center, I started this podcast out of one of the rooms in the building we rented. And that was our full-time gig for both my wife and I. And then my wife got sick with MS. I was trying to keep it going by myself. I started this podcast, and then we eventually had to shut down because of funding. And I kept this podcast going because I fell in love with learning people's stories. And the other thing that I'm building up to is, I want to ask you this question, because you were close with your dad like I was. It took me until I was 34 years old when I started that recovery center, very close to my dad. And this is no fault to him. A lot of dads don't know how to say it, especially growing up the way we did. It took me 34 years to hear the words, "I'm proud of you."
Well,
Is that something you sought from your dad ever?
oh yeah, and I can remember the day that I thought I'd never hear it again.
Yeah.
I played soccer, and I had a soccer injury, and there was a situation. I'd locked up a lot of really good offers for scholarships and even to play soccer other places. And I played in an intramural game, and I got injured. My patella shifted to the left, and my tibia and fibia came through the front. And he shows up at the hospital, and he's asking the doctor, when can I be back on the field? And the doctor looks at him and goes, "Sir, your son may never walk again." And you want to talk about shame, you want to talk about disappointment. The look on my father's face, it's like it's frozen inside of my head, and it's nowhere near as painful as it's been before. I mean, I'm saying it, and you can probably see my face is tightening a little bit. My voice has probably even come a little bit higher because it's painful, and it's one of those things I still get to work through. Um, Proudness. Let's see. Well, he did tell me he was proud because I came home to take care of him when he was dying, when I left racing. That was a really big decision. However, about 3 days before he died, he asked me to make a promise, because the one thing I can admit is there are very few promises I kept to my father. And he said that, when he dies, am I would I promise him that I'm going to try to get clean and sober.
And he even tried to absolve me of it because he saw how sick I was. And there was a number of times, even when I was taking care of him, he'd send me to treatment. Generally, he would bring me back, or he'd send somebody to come get me because he would get angry at the doctors or the home health care people. And the reason you heard that huge number is because there was no other promises left for me to keep to my father. And it's one that people remind me today I get to keep one day at a time to my dad. And every single treatment center I AMA'd from got in fights and got kicked out of, OD'd in, was sent to hospitals and never came back. Take your pick. I believe fully I had to have every one of those experiences to be the man I am today. And I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm a great man in recovery. I don't know if I'm a good man in recovery. What I do know is what Abraham Lincoln said, and that good enough is the only enemy of greatness. So I will strive for greatness. Will I hit it? I don't know. That's not up to me. And it's one of those things that for my father, I don't know if he'd want me to be a therapist or not. He had greater high and mighty ideas of me with my intellect. I don't know. Maybe you think I'm smart or not. A lot of people tell me I am, and I have a piece of paper that says this and that, and I don't care. I don't care what anybody else thinks about me. And that's the greatest thing about 12-step recovery is when it becomes rooted, you could call me the most insane liar you've ever met, and I'd look at you and go, thank you. I don't need other people to tell me who I am today. I can be confident in who I am with my connection to what I choose to believe in as my higher power, or God as I understand God. And
Yep.
it's one of those things, that self confidence, that self worth. Um, as something my sponsor said to me, and it really shaped some things for me, was you didn't work for those things. What you truly did is you prepared yourself to be capable of to receive this infinite and unending love. You didn't work for it. You just removed the things that were in the way so you could finally receive what has always been available. And, I do have sporadically, maybe once a year, dreams about my father. And there was one of them where um, I can remember seeing him smile at me. And that's something I hold on to dearly. There's so many dark things we could get into my father if you ever want to know about him, if you want to hear about how I went blind. It's one of these things when these people had me share my story at this meeting on Thursday. The person's like, I don't even feel like we heard a half of your story. And he's like, how long would you be here? I was like, I don't know. We could probably be here till midnight, and you probably still wouldn't get all of it. I
Yeah.
don't know how I'm alive. I'll give you an example. I jumped off of a 2-story building in treatment. Aimed for a snowbank, I mind you. But however, what I found out was I had a good bounce factor. And as they're carrying me in, and the doctors called back, he said, "I'm not sending you out," because I couldn't see that it was a suicide attempt at the beginning. I just wanted the crap inside of my head to stop, and it wouldn't. And he looked right at me, JD, and he goes, "You're just not that good at dying. However, if you keep trying, you're going to succeed.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered giving living a chance?" And I'd love to tell you that's where everything changed. No, it's a piece of it. But the one that got me was probably about 10 treatment centers later. This therapist sat down and he looked at me, and because he was reading my BPS and all of these answers and all this insanity. And he also had my emergency room records for that year, which was even more painful. And he goes, I'm curious. Have you ever considered that you've tried to remove yourself from this earth knowingly and unknowingly every way imaginable? I kind of looked at him and said, okay, maybe. And then he hits with me with this question, JD. He goes, did you ever imagine that whatever's out there is just not going to let you die because of all these ways you've tried and you haven't succeeded yet? That what you're truly going to have to do is to face the consequences of the choices you made? I can remember feeling a pit in my stomach and going, oh, and that was another piece of it. And the final piece is when I went to that 12-step place and got out of my own way and took some suggestions and actually stuck around. I didn't run home after I got out.
Yeah.
And there's so many elements to this. And I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for anybody that sees this. I just thank you for being who you are and that you want to help people. And let me, that's wrong. Not that you want to help people, you are helping people. And it's one of those things. Can I really put things in proper perspective? Or do I continue to go with the societal terms that society has conditioned me to, or am I able to break free from these things and see what feels most true for me? Because I find when I'm being true with me, it's a genuineness and an authenticity that there's nothing that can replace it.
Yep. And you hit it on the head. We're just scratching the surface, bud. It's been an hour and 45 minutes, and I feel like we could have talked for 4 or 5 hours. And that's the nice thing about this show. And any of the 2 shows that I do, you can come back on. We can talk more. We can dig into a certain subject and just dig for an hour or 2, and just get into more. I wanted to cover, jump around a little bit and learn. In this first one, and as you know, you're never done therapy. There's no graduating therapy. And
you mentioned it about, I'll say it to you like this: only a fool has themselves for a sponsor.
yeah,
Only a fool has themselves for their lawyer. And it is also my personal belief, not just does only a fool have himself for a therapist. However, behind every good therapist is the therapist they go to.
yep, yeah,
Because if you don't have a way to have an outlet for some of these things, that you're dancing with hungry ghosts that
yep.
are looking for someone to consume.
And like I
And
said, Tony Soprano had a therapist. Well, Tony Soprano's therapist had a therapist. And
yes,
and it's funny, we met in Swift Steps. My second guest on this show was Jules, who created Swift Steps. She was the
incredible
second guest
woman.
on this show. She has been on my other show twice. I met her 4 years ago when her and her mom did a podcast together called How I Met My Sober Mother. And I was a guest on that show, and then she was a guest on mine in return. And then, we're
Love
both
it.
from the same area of like Philadelphia, New Jersey, and we've been good friends since. So, I'm glad that her and I met so that you and I could meet. And that's the kind of I love networking and recovery. And this is the kind of thing that, having these interactions for almost 2 hours is something that I love and I thrive on. And I'm going to message you to schedule something to be in my NA meeting to be my speaker one of these weeks, because I love hearing you talk, and definitely going to have you on again. And thank you so much for Matt taking the time today and putting yourself out there for me.
And JD, I'm open to any questions you ever want to ask. If you got a specific topic you want to jump into, CPTSD or childhood trauma, you come up with whatever you'd like to, and I'll let you know if I'm capable of doing that or not. Because that's one of the most powerful things for me, is, can I admit that that's not my wheelhouse?
Gladly.
And that's where my ego gets in the way.
Yep.
And I really let somebody know, you know what, I'm not the one for that, but I bet you I got somebody who is.
Awesome. Thank you so much, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, you have a wonderful night, man. Thank
you too. Bye-bye.